Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Regeneron Science Talent Search webinar, Show Me Your Application. Tonight, we are really excited to share advice from all sorts of audiences who have gone through the process themselves, who help design the application process and know exactly what to look for, and from people who actually review the entries and are giving scores and picking the winners. So we're excited to share all of that great advice with you tonight. My name is Allie Stiefel, and I'm the director of the Regeneron Science Talent Search. I've been with the Society for Science for 12 years and running this program for 7 or 8 at this point. With my colleague, Elaine Edwards. Elaine, you can give them a wave and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elaine Edwards, and I am the Senior Specialist for the Regeneron Science Talent Search. Been with the Society for about 4 years now, and every year it is such a treat to have so many incredible entrants. We are just so excited to share some incredible tips with you tonight, and to also hear some advice from some other parties who will be very excited to give you some top tips for your application.
That's right. So together, Elaine and I designed the application process, the rubrics. So we have a little advice for you too tonight. But also, if you're curious and you're here tonight because you wonder, what is the Science Talent Search and how do I get started with my application? We have about a dozen extra webinars that we have filmed over the last 3 years that you can find on our website to learn all about the process. So tonight we'll talk a little more specifically about tips from other parties. But if you want a little bit more, be sure to check out our website and you'll find what you're looking for. So with that, getting started, want to frame the conversation tonight about what we're looking for with the Science Talent Search competition. Science Talent Search is the nation's oldest and most prestigious STEM research competition for high school seniors, but it's very different from a lot of the other STEM competitions out there. We're looking for future leaders in STEM, not just the best research in a given year. And that's why our application process is a holistic process. We consider those essays, the full application, your transcripts, test scores, if you want to share them, they're totally optional. And those recommendations, all of it is really helpful to show us the leadership skills that you have in various aspects of your life. Doesn't have to just be STEM. And for you to keep in mind that we're looking for potential for leadership. So with that, we have a couple of general tips that we'll share tonight. The first thing that I always like to tell students who are getting started before you tackle your application is to make a list and consider this your North Star or your thesis for your full application, a list of 5 things that you care about in 5 ways that you lead in your various communities, the soccer team, your religious community, whatever it is. This is a great way to kind of get a sketch of yourself. We see a lot of students who really think they have to show perfection through the application process. I'm here to tell you that's not true. We'd really rather see every part of you, in that context is really important. So make a list, get to know yourself through that process, and that will help you shine in the actual paper version of the competition. Other advice I'll share with you is that done is better than perfect. We know that entrants like to spend a lot of time really refining and perfecting their answers, and that's great if you have the time to do it. We know this is a really busy time of year for the high school senior, and so we also understand that sometimes you make sacrifices, and if you want to make sure you enter on time by the November 8th, 2023 at 8 p.m. deadline, you want to make sure you have something written down, right? So done is better than perfect. Whatever you have by that deadline, be ready to submit it and don't overthink it. The other piece of advice I'll share is that honesty is the best policy. Giving truthful answers is much better than trying to write something that maybe is a little less truthful that you think makes you sound fancy, or you're using to try to impress us, but it turns out to not be impressive because it's not true. Really telling the truth and giving the full context of your life is far more impressive to us. We also want to make sure that you're showing integrity in your application, because integrity is really important in scientific careers, right? Making sure we have the right data and the discoveries are true and correct, and they're really having an impact on human beings. And that really starts for us with seeing what you write in your application. So if your parents helped you with your project, that's great. Just let us know and don't try to disguise that, for one example. Also, request your recommendations now if you have not already done so. They are due the same day as your application. You want to give the adults in your life plenty of time to get the work done on your behalf. Don't let them scramble, give them that gift of time. and also remind them about the due date because they forget to. And then do a little bit at a time and save your work. In our system, you can save and work as you go. I recommend saving your big essays outside of our system, just in case something goes wrong or you lose internet and you try to save and you've lost a whole essay. But this will help you working in chunks with time management. So those are just some tips from our team for some things hurdles we see students face from time to time.
All right, and so like we said, we have plenty of other folks who have been through this application process from a different perspective than maybe we would have as staff. So the first we're very excited to share are some finalists have joined us today to share their top tips and advice. But of course, we have also gotten some advice from folks who couldn't be here today. You'll see on the screen just a few quotes and advice from some of our finalists from this past class of STS winners. Things like perseverance and remembering what drives you. Things like not letting our lengthy application process discourage you. At this point, we are a little less than a month out from our deadline, but that is still plenty of time to apply. If you have either just gotten started or are still thinking about it, we would love to have you. It is definitely still doable. And as you can see here, that process is very rewarding. We also like to remind our students that passion is the driver of every successful scientist, and our finalists definitely agree with that as well. We hope to see that passion in all of your applications, and we certainly have seen it in many scholars and finalists from all of our past classes of winners. But with that, I will turn it over to Allie to introduce our finalists.
Thank you. I stopped sharing my screen so we can see our wonderful guests who have joined us today. I'm pleased to introduce you to two, not just of the 40 finalists from the last 2 years, but actually both top 3 winners of the Science Talent Search in their respective years. So two people who kind of know a lot about this process and have done very well, and also just great people. So we're glad they've joined us today. Christine and Emily are joining us both from Stanford University, and I'll let them both introduce themselves to you, maybe where they went to high school, and then I just said where you are now, but tell us what you're studying as well. So Christine, why don't you go first?
Sure. Thank you for the introduction. So, hi everyone. My name is Christine. I was the winner of the 2022 Science Talent Search, and I'm currently a student at Stanford studying physics and math. And I went to high school just outside Seattle, Washington.
Thanks, Christine and Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily Ocasio. I'm a freshman at Stanford, and I placed second in the 2023 Science Talent Search. If this is evidence to you that you don't have to be 1000% STEM to apply, I'm not totally sure on my major yet, but I think it's going to be sociology or comparative studies in race and ethnicity. So I was super interested in STEM in high school. I went to the New School of Northern Virginia outside of DC, but I also had other passions and I did very well.
Fantastic. Oh, it's so interesting to hear what you're studying in both very great fields. So talking about the application process, it maybe seems so long ago, but really it's a long process. So I'm sure it made an impression on each of you. Walk me through, for the entrants, kind of your personal timeline of doing a project and going through the application. How long did it take, and what was that journey like?
I can go first. So I started working with my advisor, Dr. Maya Fishbach, I would say early junior year. So almost like maybe a year or two before the actual application. And then I started the project that would eventually become the paper that I submitted to the Science Talent Search. I would say spring of my junior year. So I worked on that project pretty much full time that summer and then through the application period. But even though the project itself that I submitted for the Science Talent Search was a pretty short one and not one that I spent, years and years working on, it was kind of the culmination of a lot of other interests I had in astrophysics and in the field in general. So I know finalists in my year had timelines that range from this is a project they worked on their whole high school career, so this is the project they started the summer before and submitted it. And again, the science talent search is really so much more than just the research paper. It really is like a holistic look at your STEM leadership and a lot of factors just beyond the exact timeline and details of the projects.
Yeah, so my timeline was a little bit longer. I think I worked on it maybe for 2 years before the application. However, at no point in time was it really the full-time thing I was working on. It was always, like a couple hours every week, a little bit more slow and steady. So, and I worked also with a professor. However, I met the professor and began working with him, I think maybe 2 or 2.5 years, I don't remember exactly, sorry, before I applied. However, about 6 months into working with him, I had realized that the project I had spent all that time on wasn't feasible because I couldn't afford the data. And so I had to totally start over. And so I talked about that in my application. And I think that although I didn't really have multiple science experiences, this was kind of my only main science experience. I hadn't even really gone to a science fair before STS. The fact that I was able to talk about the revision process and the amount of work and thought that was put into it took up a lot of my application.
Totally. And those are both different paths, but obviously both very successful if that applies to anyone else out there. It's a long application. We know that there's a lot we want to know. There's a lot of money on the line. I mean, the top prize is $250,000. We take the responsibility very seriously. So we know that maybe perhaps you have some tips that you'd like to share about managing the process, like anything that comes to mind immediately of how you approached it in that more technical way.
Yeah, I can go first. So I personally recycled a lot of the essays that I used for my college applications because for a lot of schools, the restrictive early action deadline was right around the same time as the Regeneron deadline. So that was really useful for me as kind of a big motivator. Like you have these two big things kind of due at the beginning of November. So October is going to be a work pretty hard time. And personally, one thing that really excited me was Halloween's my favorite holiday. And so what I told myself to try to get it done early was that if you get everything submitted before Halloween, you can have like the best Halloween you've ever had. I unfortunately did not do that. And I ended up submitting on November 7th, I think, or whatever the day before the deadline was last year. But the reason why I ended up delaying was because there's a couple essays that I just didn't feel proud of. And I think my biggest advice, no matter what you're applying to, especially when there's such high money on the line, is to submit an application that if you're not accepted, you won't be upset about, which is sometimes, harder to do, like easier to say than do. But it's something that when I was applying to colleges and when I was applying to scholarships, a lot that I didn't get made me feel a lot better about the process, that I was happy with looking at this as a portfolio of my work and reflection of who I am, regardless of what a judge thought of it.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything Emily said about the process being kind of an opportunity for introspection and self-reflection. A lot of the prompts that are in the application are really designed, I think, not just to give the judges more information on your project and your process and your interest in science, but also an opportunity for you to really kind of think internally about what drives you, what you really contributed. And honestly, it was nice to kind of go through and think about and really write up everything that I contributed to my project, everything that I worked on, and have the opportunity to step back and be proud of how much I did. I personally knew that I wanted to apply to the Science Talent Search pretty early on. So I was able to get a nice early start, and I started it around the time I started my other college applications. And so also, like Emily said, there is a really nice harmony between applying for the Science Talent Search and applying to college. One thing that was really nice is that once I had all my little research blurbs and layman's explanations and questions written up for the research portion of the STS application, that translated really nicely to being able to submit a research portfolio to other colleges that wanted to see like research and writing samples.
Yeah, that's great, especially when you can reuse content or recycle content. Exactly. We hope all of you are doing that. We don't mind that you do that. I know some places do. And so for us, I think hopefully you've seen on our site that we're cool with you doing that. So please, by all means, do. We want to reduce burden where we can. It's a busy time. How did you feel going through the process and then submitting it and then being named a finalist? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I can go first again. I remember I was like pretty nervous about submitting my application. I think, like Emily, I also submitted it pretty close to the deadline. Like, I think I had one last meeting with my advisor and we went through everything. And I was like, okay, I'm going to submit right after this meeting. It was maybe due like the evening or like the day after. But then I kind of almost forgot about like the nerves and how I felt about that in the rush of applying to like other schools and everything that was happening my senior year of high school. And then I remember when the top 300 list came out. And I think I actually found out by literally scrolling through the list or like control Fing for my name. So that was very, very nerve wracking. And then when they called me to tell me I was a finalist, it was like so exciting. One of the honestly the highlights of my senior year. I just remember thinking, you know, how like glad I was for all the time I put into the application. It is very long, but you know, like both for the self-reflection and then also for being able to be recognized for my work and just so excited. No one from my high school has really ever been a finalist before, or kind of even, it's not really like even like standard at my high school to like participate in the science talent search or to think to enter. And so it was, I guess I just felt like so like accomplished and like the right work I did was being recognized by people outside.
Yeah, honestly, I have such a similar story. For me, I remember when I applied, I didn't totally understand that there was a level past top 300, which sounds really crazy. But I was the second person ever from my school to apply. The first one was actually my older brother 2 years before, and he was much more STEM focused than I was, and he made it to top 300. And so I was like, okay, let me try to see if I can even do as good as he did. And I knew that there was something beyond 300, but when I applied, in my mind, that was just like for kids who were really good at like STEM or math, and like that just was not even me. And so I didn't even look at what the prizes really were or anything. I didn't understand how the process worked. And so when I got top 300, I remember it was like noon or something, and my parents tried to meet me like outside of school to be there when I opened it because we, live nearby. But they sent an email that came like a minute early before my parents got there, and so I tried to pretend I didn't see that I made it to top 300, and then they didn't believe me. And so then when I got the phone call for top 40, I was like, okay, I got to tell them right away because they were so mad that I opened 300 without them. And I remember I denied the call like 4 or 5 times. I don't know, like, Sally, if you remember this, I think you were the one who called me because it kept coming up as spam risk. And I remember I was taking a nap and it had called back for like the 4th time. And I was just so frustrated, like, who keeps calling me? But I pick up and I'm like, hello. And then they were like, you've been selected as a finalist for the science talent search. And I remember sprinting upstairs. And my house always is filled with people. And for some reason, nobody was home. I think like the first time ever in my life, I remember that happening. So yeah, I was so ecstatic and overwhelmed. I remember it was absolutely insane. And I remember one big reason why I was so shocked to have won was because, as I've mentioned, I'm not really a traditional STEM student. But my big advice to people who aren't traditional STEM students is to think about how thinking like a scientist is going to affect everything that you do. And if you one day become like the president, if that's your goal, why going into that job with like rigorous, like statistical or like proof-based thought and care is going to make you a better president, and talk about that. So yeah.
Totally. That's both great stories and I think encouraging, right? If you've never had a finalist or a scholar or even an entrant from your high school, you can still do just as well, right? So that's another myth we have to bust a lot. And so I'm so glad that was not really your experience, right? Is that you could be just as successful. I know we have you both for not much longer because there are midterms going on at Stanford. And so thank you for joining tonight. Any final tips or anything else you would want to get across about your STS experience to this year's entrance?
I think for my maybe advice, I would say that it's very easy to look at the profiles of past winners and like the kinds of things like their journeys and their research and become almost discouraged when your profile doesn't match or you have more of an unconventional journey. But I would really say something that I learned both through the process of science talent search and then also after a year at college and after doing more research and having a lot more experience there is that your uniqueness and what sets you apart in your journey is really your strength, not your weakness, right? So rather than trying to hide what the specific things that pique your interest, the specific unique experiences that you have, your unique background in the name of trying to fit some mold, there is no mold for the science talent search or really for most things in life. And so your like greatest strength is truly what makes you unique, and you'll be not only much happier personally, but also likely more successful if you really buy into that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think what I would think was so strong about my application was because I truly deeply believed that my research had like an impact on the world, because what I was researching was to me like the most important thing ever. And it made it unconventional, because what's truly the most important thing to you is probably different than everybody else. And so I think by doubling down on that and really focusing on that and talking about the impact and the care, my passion and my like sincerity came through. So absolutely, I wouldn't try to be more like somebody else, because they're going to pick whoever they think is most genuine. And if you're faking and they're not, they're going to be more genuine. So you can only be genuine in what you're telling the truth about, if that makes sense. And it really, really is always going to matter. Like you can't pretend to care about something you don't.
That's just fantastic advice. Thank you both for joining us. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about the evaluation process and hear from some evaluators. But thank you, Christine and Emily. It was awesome to see you. And feel free to hop and get studying, and good luck with your midterms. We're so proud of both of you, and we'll be in touch. And I'm going to get back to sharing my screen here, bye guys, so that we can show you, our next section. Great. There we go. A little video for you. Oh. One moment. For some reason, it's not playing. Let's see. We'll try this again.
How the applicant came up with their research idea. That's really important. I want to know the level of initiative. I also look at, what is the student responsible? Did the student come up with the design? Did the student come up with the methodology? Did the student develop the analysis? So I want to see what role the student was involved in actually executing the study. One thing that you look at is what the research mentor is saying. Does that match up with what the student is saying?
And sometimes it doesn't.
And sometimes it does not. You're absolutely right.
That is really one of the problems when the student says, I thought of this idea, I did all the analysis, I did this. And the mentor says,
nope. Everybody doesn't have the same level of access. I give credit for the creativity. I give credit for them thinking of unique approaches to answer their scientific question.
Begin to get a sense of how you can evaluate fairly the students' opportunities, and how that student either made opportunities or used opportunities available. And so has the student made good use of those resources, which is one reason, by the way, for me, ideas and creativity are so important, because you can have those whether you're working in your basement or whether you're working in a very high level lab.
It all comes back to the writing for me. I think one of my most favorite projects was a home-based project where you could just, I mean, the innovation of this student just radiated in the paper.
When you read the application, sometimes you can really tell the student wasn't all that engaged in doing the research, and it shows. Over the years, I've seen most dramatically the increase in the quality of the applications we get. They're becoming more and more sophisticated and just extraordinary.
The talent is so impressive and inspiring.
What I think is fascinating is that these students are really multidimensional.
Mhm.
They're not just scientists. They're also athletes. They're also artists. They also are engaged in community service. They really have so much depth in terms of who they are and what they have to offer. I want to know how the applicant came up with their.
All right, so those were some excellent tips from our evaluators, which for context, those are the PhD scientists who are charged with reviewing all of the entries and helping us narrow it down to those top 300 scholars. So they really are those first eyes on your application. And so we really value what they have to say and are so grateful to them for sharing their perspective. But a couple points that we wanted to distill from what they had to say. One being just very much make sure to tell our evaluators how you contributed to each part of your research project. They pointed out that specific details are really important. Being able to show us what you contributed to, where you showed initiative, that is going to be very helpful in determining the level of your contribution to the research and to all of your pursuits in the application. The other side of that, though, is definitely be honest. Whether you are talking about those opportunities or your extracurriculars, or again, those levels, that level of contribution to the project, we want you to be honest about definitely any outside support that you have received, any adults who have helped you along the way. It's definitely important to disclose that and to be honest as part of our process, both just to give credit and so we can give credit to you for the amazing things that you have done yourself. Finally, your passion is important. I know that that's something we've heard echoed in our finalists and now again in our evaluators, which makes it all the more true that we really do want to see your commitment and your drive. Show us why you do what you do. So definitely all good things to keep in mind. And thanks again to our evaluators for sharing their advice.
Absolutely. I'll just add that we had a really lovely conversation with them to record their advice for you and their insights on what it's like to review all of the applications from the entrants around the country. And the other theme that kept coming up is just how difficult of a job they have, because we do receive so many amazing entries from students just like you. The other thing I'll harp on here is the context piece. We don't know about, or they don't know about your life circumstances and what opportunities were available to you or not, unless you tell us, right? So don't be embarrassed about what you had or didn't have. Be proud of what you did instead with what you had to work with. So let us know that. Very important. Okay, next, we're going to get some rules advice. We are joined by our colleague, Lori Dixon, who is the judging specialist here at Society for Science. She works on all of our competitions. And Lori has a big job of managing the judges and these evaluators with us, but also helping to enforce and draft our rules. So Lori is here to talk about some of those top ways you can avoid getting disqualified, which does happen, unfortunately, from time to time. So I will let Lori take it away.
Hello, everyone. Congratulations on even opening an application if you've opened one. And if you haven't, we look forward to receiving it soon. The biggest issue that I would say you should focus on when preparing your application is definitely your documentation. Your paperwork is of utmost importance, and that includes just making sure that you pay attention to the minutest details. For example, checking check boxes that need to be checked on the forms that you submit, making sure that you have documents that are signed, that they are dated and dated properly. So if you check back over after you receive them from other people who are signing them for you, make sure they've done their job, because they sometimes forget. They're the ones who leave a checkbox unchecked and things like that. So please make sure you double check all of your documentation. Understand that you can use ISA forms, but you don't have to, but you do need to have the documentation of your dates and all of the things and the information that we need to to give you. So also having said that, please refer to our official rules and guidelines that you'll find on our website for specifics. But overall, a few things I want to point out is that, first of all, human participants. Every human participant study needs to have pre-approval from an IRB before you experiment. That's really key. So especially for some people who started their experiments early, that's still a rule for us. You have to have pre-approval from your IRB. So please make sure that you have the forms, you have that signed and dated, and know that if you put different dates on that than your mentor, that we will know that. So again, the honesty point is really one thing to highlight, because most mentors, they won't be dishonest. So please, talk with them. And if there's any issues, you can send us an email in advance, but please be honest and make sure all of your dates are correct and that all of your forms are signed. Another key point I want to mention is that parents and mentors cannot be a member of your IRB team. If you have any questions about that, again, go to our website. We have some information on what constitutes an IRB, but definitely know that that is absolutely not something that can happen. If you are using publicly available data sources and including cell lines and tissues, they may or may not require pre-approval. So again, you want to check with our official rules, but making sure that when you are using publicly available data sets, that you include the link to the source that you use, and definitely catalog numbers. If you ordered something from a catalog, please write down the catalog number and include that for us. That's a simple thing that makes it so much easier to go through your project if we have that information. Another thing that trips people up sometimes is surveys. We get a lot of surveys done. Surveys are surveys of human beings, so they count as human participants. So please understand that that also needs IRB approval, and your IRB will let you know whether you need consent forms. If they check the box that you need consent forms, then please make sure you have done that and gotten copies of those uploaded to us, and just the copy of the consent form, not the official ones that were filled out, but a copy of the consent form. Another area that gets a little tricky when using human data is that all human data must be de-identified before it is given to you to do an experiment on. So your mentor can verify this in their recommendation if the data is from a private source, but just get them to write in their letter a documentation that yes, you had consent to use this data, they gave you their consent, and that they definitely de-identified the data before it was given to you. Inventions. A lot of students submit inventions, and that's great and it's wonderful, but most of the time they want to test those inventions on someone. Again, if you test your invention, your app, your game, your prototype, that's a human participant. So again, it needs that pre-approval from an IRB, unless, of course, you are the only tester. If you, the student, are the only tester of the app or invention, you do not need to get approval for that. But if anyone else, be it mom, be it dad, sister, little brother, you need pre-approval. So please keep that in mind when you're developing inventions and apps and things. They count as humans. The testers are humans, so we need them to have that be pre-approved. Vertebrate animals. Yes, so vertebrate animal studies include your family pet, and it cannot be conducted at home. These studies can't be done at home unless it's purely observational. And another issue we come a lot, what is observational? Observational means you changed absolutely nothing in the environment of the animal. That is including changing the type of food that you might give to the animal. It just means you simply watch the animal. So if you want to do anything other than watch the animal and record data, you have to have pre-approval using an IACUC. And then absolutely positively no studies involving animal sacrifice. I know it sounds silly to say that, but we have had it happen before. And it usually happens with students who are working in our research institutes. So you cannot be involved in any way in those studies. PHBAs, another kind of area that we like to talk about a lot. Absolutely no PHB studies can be done at home. They require risk assessment that usually we need you to clearly define and describe what organisms you're using and or what hazardous substances that you're using. Where is your research being done? Give us the location, any safety precautions that you have taken, any training that's been given to you if you were doing it at a lab, and what supervision was provided to you while you were conducting these studies. And one of the biggest things that we deal with too is labs, research done in school labs. You need to really understand what type of lab your school has. And so your lab at school will be designated generally either BSL-1 or BSL-2 laboratory. You need to know that what that means, and you can ask your science teachers and your school and what types of studies are allowed in your specific school lab. So that's very important. And so we need to know which type of lab your school has. So that's a box that can be checked on a form, or that's something that the mentor can write in for us. But either way, please make sure that you have that designated. And then finally, I want to mention, it's very important that you disclose your close family and personal relationships with people who you work with, whether it be in the school lab or a regulated research institute, or just a mentor that possibly one of your family members helped you obtain because they are also scientists. We need to know that information. It isn't not a problem at all. We expect you have mentors, and it's great. You need mentors, but we need to know that they exist and what the relationship to you is. And that also includes friends of family members, co-workers of family members. If your parent works in a lab and they introduced you to the coworker, even though the family member doesn't work in the same lab, but they're in the company, we need to know that. And so please, again, just be honest and disclose the relationship. It generally isn't a conflict of interest, but we need to know. So again, just be honest and let us know as much as you possibly can about everything that you have done. And your rules review process will go very smoothly, and hopefully you won't have any issues at all. But again, just want to really reiterate, please go read carefully through our formal rules, entry rules that you can find on our website. And then if you have any questions whatsoever about, a specific thing that you are worried about, please email us. We will get back to you generally in a couple of days. But now that this high application season, we're turning around questions pretty quick. So we may get back to you even in the same day, but just send us your question. It's better to be safe and ask the question than to go through all the mounds of paperwork and then find out after the fact that it was a problem. So when in doubt, like it says on the tips, just be honest, provide as much detail and as much context as you can, and everything should go pretty smoothly.
That's right. Thank you so much, Lori. That was so helpful. I think if you're an entrant watching this, what I would do is right now, go open your application, go to your application if it's open, or if you haven't opened it, go do that. Go to task 3. That's the rules task. With what Lori said fresh in mind, go through and answer the questions. It's a series of if-then questions that kind of guide you towards what kind of paperwork you need based on what you did. A lot of students misinterpret those questions. But with Lori's advice just now, I think you'll be able to better interpret all those questions based on that. So keep that in mind and you'll have all the right stuff. And Lori's tips will help make sure your application is fully considered. So thank you, Lori. We appreciate it.
All right, well, we have heard some excellent advice today, but we have one more very special guest who has some additional tips to share with you. We are so pleased to welcome in video form, Dr. Jason Valentine, the head of the STS judging panel. So let's take a look at this clip and see Dr. Valentine's tips.
Hi, my name is Jason Valentine. I'm a professor of mechanical engineering at Vanderbilt University. I'm also chair of the judging committee for the Regeneron STS competition. I want to take a few minutes to give you some pointers on filling out an application. First of all, each year we get so many fantastic applicants. It makes our life as judges pretty challenging. In order to separate applicants and determine who's the semifinalist group, who's the finalist group, we need a fairly long application. So my first pointer is to start early. This is not an application that you want to put off to the last minute. There are several different parts of the application and each part is read by the judges and each part is important. So I want to step through them and give you some pointers on each. You're going to have essay questions. This is a chance for us to get to know you. What drives you? What challenges have you overcome? We are not looking for perfection in an applicant. Future leaders in science are going to come from many different walks of life in many different forms. Tell us what makes you that. What makes you a future leader? With examples. Okay. You're going to have reference letter writers. Make sure that you choose people that know you, that can talk specifically about you and what makes you so fantastic. Moving into the research section, you're going to have some essay questions about your research project. Let us know what drove you to this research, what drove you to this project. If it's your idea, how did you come up with the idea? What drives you as a scientist? Okay. Again, we want to get to know you through this application. You're going to have a section where you describe your contributions to your project. You need to be specific here, okay? We get projects from across the spectrum, from university labs to high school research labs to home garages. And every project has a different level of mentoring, okay? It's fine to have a mentor. You just need to be specific about what your contribution was and what you got help with. What is against the rules is to have help on a project and not acknowledge it, okay? Please be specific in that section. Finally, moving on to the project description. Your project description is going to be read by PhDs in your field of study. It's also going to be read by PhDs who are not directly in your field of study. So you need to be able to balance the depth and breadth of your project so that both experts in your field can appreciate your contributions and experts outside of your field can appreciate your contributions and what makes your project so special. And that's a challenging thing to do. And it's a thing that you'll have to do throughout your career as a scientist. So time to get practice. That's about it. The fact that you're watching this means you're at least considering submitting an application. And I really hope you do. I hope you submit a fantastic one and make our lives as judges really challenging. And if things go well, hopefully I'll see you in March for finalist judging. Hi, my name is
Great. So Dr. Valentine and his committee of 18 PhD top judges, they determine the top 40 who come to DC and each receive $25,000 and then judge them while they're in DC in March and name the top 10 winners. So a very challenging job they have indeed. So just to reiterate some of Dr. Valentine's tips that we agree with too, don't wait until the last minute. We still have 3 weeks. That's still a lot of time. We know there's a lot happening in your life right now, but there's still plenty of time to put your best self out there. Each part of your application does matter. You know, I've heard on like message boards online, I know they're out there, and in the chit chat on the interwebs that certain parts of the application don't matter as much, or that you certain things are not considered until certain levels of judging, or that what's another one, that you or that we have quotas that we're looking for certain grades and then we'll dismiss a set of students because of that. Those are all made up things that have come through the rumor mill, and that's not how our process works. We have a proprietary process, so we can't tell you exactly how it works, but I think we've dropped enough hints today to let you know that every part really does matter and absolutely is considered. Please be specific. I think you've heard that a lot tonight. Again, we don't know what you don't tell us, so make sure you include that. And then we're not looking for perfection. There's no cookie cutter ideal candidate. You have to tell us what makes you a future leader in STEM.
All right, and so to sort of summarize a lot of what we've heard today and wrap it up with a couple of our final tips. Number one, which Lori touched on earlier, is just definitely make sure to review our rules, but also our resources. We, in addition to this webinar, have a ton of extra webinars on our YouTube page. We also have plenty of additional resources, including FAQ pages, application walkthroughs. Pretty much if you have a question, I guarantee it is most likely in some place on the internet. If it isn't, you also have the option always of emailing us at sts@societyforscience.org. We've popped that address in the chat should you need it, but definitely take advantage of all of the many great resources available to you. Reiterating just one final time, be detailed and honest. Context is key. We've said that many times over in all of our webinars, but definitely just make sure to give credit to those who supported you along the way and give credit to yourself. Definitely share the details, share your experiences. We want to hear them all. On that note, also tell us what drives you. Definitely make sure to show us your passion, not just for STEM, but for all your other pursuits. Again, STS is looking for future leaders in science. Finally, just a final reminder here for our deadline. It is November 8th at 8 p.m. ET. So coming up more quickly than any of us, I think we're really expecting. Very important to make sure all your materials are in by that deadline, including recommendations. So definitely a great idea to go and have a conversation with your project recommender, your educator recommender, even your high school counselor who is submitting your high school report. Make sure that they are aware of that deadline and are prepared to submit early, and so are you. All right, and I think with that, we will head into some Q&A. We do have a couple questions in our chat, so let me take a look.
Awesome. While Elaine is looking for our first question, something I wanted to add about the rules, and just speaking of resources, this reminded me, if you were wondering what is an IRB or where do I go to get my project approved by an IRB, we actually have in our official rules book a guide to starting an IRB at your high school. You need to have a school administrator, like your principal. Sometimes it's even the superintendent, but somebody like that, a medical professional. Sometimes that can be the school nurse, or a parent volunteer as a doctor, as long as it's not your parent, and also a teacher who is not mentoring your project. So you can have a committee of 3 people. They can do a review to make sure everything is safe, but we have instructions for that. So don't feel like that's a limiting factor to you. The guide is a resource, so look it up.
Awesome. All right. So our first question here, are judges interested in reading students' code if your project used coding?
Yeah, this is a great question. So in the research report, which is where you share your original research project with us, you are limited to 20-page paper. Those 20 pages do not include your title page, your abstract, your bibliography. They do include everything else, including code. So if you want to wedge some code in there, feel free. It might mean the rest of your paper has to be truncated a bit. If you want to wedge some code in our existing essay spaces, that's all you have to work with. Unfortunately, we cannot, and this is at the choice of our judging panel. We ask them this every year, and this is their decision. They do not wish to see links. They are not allowed to click on any links you include in your application to send them to an external website to tell more about you or to show tons and tons of code. So what we recommend, I know this is a challenge for computer science projects. The page limitation is a challenge for lots of different types of projects for other or similar reasons, like you can't show all your data or whatever. show what's unique, different. Do your best to show like the little parts that are different. I know that's not the answer most computer scientists love to hear, but that's the recommendation of our panel.
Awesome. All right. Kind of going to summarize this one because it's a pretty common question. Tell us, are parents allowed to be recommenders? And if so, how do you recommend students approach that?
Totally, yeah. This can happen for a couple of different reasons, like the parent is the mentor. If the parent is the mentor who knows the project best, yeah, of course, that makes total sense. Sometimes a student is unmentored. And in that case, our recommendation is that we still want to see a project rec for that student. And the parent is an appropriate person often to fill that out. Even if you weren't the mentor, you can still say, yes, my child was safe handling fire or whatever they did. Or you can say, I am just verifying that my kid really did not have a mentor, right? Those are the two main circumstances that where we see that, I feel. In the case where the parent is the mentor, of course, please disclose. Mentors and entrants are asked about disclosure for conflicts of interest or potential conflicts of interest. I mean, having your parent as a mentor does count. If you disclose that information, it's all above board. It's all great. If you don't disclose that, and we find out later that person is your parent because you're on a paper published together or whatever it is, your teacher rats you out and their recommendation, something like that, these are real scenarios, you just don't want to be caught being dishonest about that. Or, parent says, this is the best student I've ever mentored. Maybe it's true, but then we find out that their parent, it feels biased, even if it's not, right? So that's where you want to try to avoid that. I hope that helps answer the question.
Yeah, I definitely think that will. Like I said, that's a very common one we get a lot of the time. I'll also just add to that, in case folks don't know watching this, that for both the project recommendation and the educator recommendation, you have the option to request up to 2 of those.
Right.
And so if you do have a parent who oversees your project, or maybe you're homeschooled, your parent is your teacher, always an option and a great idea to get a second supportive adult to fill out one of those, even if they don't have as much knowledge of your project or as much potentially to say about your character, your ability as a learner. That's still going to help give us outside additional context from someone who is not a parent.
Yeah, and if you also want to make it clear that we're not biased against parents being mentors, that's really great. We have no judgment about however a student gets into the field. It's just knowing that nugget is helpful for a lot of reasons.
Absolutely. All right, Lori, I think I have a question for you here. Do IACUC pre-approval documents need to include original dates of approval? What about if someone has a renewal date documented?
Yeah, so that is a very good question. So if you are working at a regulated research institute, you should submit the original approval that the lab received. So your mentor would have that information to give to you. That's important because that approval would have been given before your research began. And so that's what we need. So definitely you want to do that. If they have a renewal, that's fine, but give us the original date so we know when the original approval was given. So that's definitely what we need in that case.
Excellent. All right. If someone worked with 2 professors on a project and they're equally involved, are they allowed to co-write a recommendation?
I've never seen it. They are allowed to each write a recommendation. You're allowed to request 2 project recs. If there's a reason you're not, you can ask us more specifically about that by email. But yeah, I can't say I've ever seen it. There are word limits to the questions. Yeah, no, I guess theoretically it wouldn't be the worst thing, but also it's gives them more opportunity to brag about you if you have 2 separate ones. So maybe think about it that way. I don't know.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think we have a couple that were actually submitted in advance that I'll go to next, but we definitely have a couple minutes left if folks still want to add things in the chat. But some questions we received in advance. How important would you say grades, having a published paper, how important would you say those things are in the decision process for STS?
Sure, I can touch on that. So grades are important. You know, just like we say that you have to have a good research project, but it's not all about the research. Same kind of goes for grades. If you feel like your grades are maybe not as strong as you might like them to be, I wouldn't let that be a deterrent, because sometimes it's all relative, right? So we've had students who maybe their grades from a traditional point of view did not seem like straight A, all AP, whatever, go on to place very well in the competition because, wow, that project was crazy amazing. And the student showed leadership in the other things that they did. And wow, their grades were maybe not as great as they might have thought they were, but they had great test scores, or even if they didn't in that case, right? That's where that kind of stuff all balances out. So if you feel like that's a particular area for you, that's more of a weakness, you probably have other things that balance it, right? Maybe to make that point. So I wouldn't stress about that too much. Also, like if you are like a math person and you had, biology was just not your strong suit as a subject, maybe that's okay because you want to be the mathematician anyway, right? So they look at that kind of stuff with that in mind. So don't worry too much. The published paper thing is a great question. We get that one a lot too. You absolutely can submit a published paper. A good number of students do, a good number of students do not. I think they fare equally well in this competition. There are a lot of reasons why a paper might get published, and a lot of reasons why a paper might not be published yet. Maybe STS is the thing that helps push it over the edge, or just hasn't been submitted yet, or maybe it never will be. Maybe a student doesn't know how to go about that process because they weren't mentored, right? And so if they were mentored, then they might be part of a machine that publishes papers pretty regularly. And that's cool too. What an honor to have your name on a paper at a young age. And maybe you really did do it all and you're publishing like Nature, and we've seen that too. So all to say, again, it's all kind of relative, but you do not have to have published research. Your research can be published that you enter. If you are submitting published research, some tips for you. If you are the first author or the sole author of your paper, by all means, you can submit that to us as long as it fits like in our page limit, right? If you are one of like 20 authors on a paper, it's not super helpful to submit that manuscript. It goes back to what like Dr. Valentine was saying about what you contributed to the work. If you're one of 20 authors, maybe you did contribute most of that paper, but it gets muddy, right? Like it's harder to pick out what you did. So in those kinds of circumstances, we recommend drawing out what you did, writing something slightly different for STS, certainly reference the other paper and tell us all about it. I mean, it's really great to have that, right? So mention it in task 6 and in task 4, but you don't need to, that would be my tip for that.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. But as always, if we didn't get to your question or if we answered it, but you still have questions, definitely feel free to reach out to us, like I said, at sts@societyforscience.org. We are always happy to help, especially as we get closer to the deadline. That inbox is staffed by multiple members, so that's definitely the fastest way to get a response from one of our staff. But Allie or Lori, any final tips to share with our audience?
Good luck, keep going, you can do it. And also not mentioned so much tonight, but at our next one, we'll be talking about it a lot. The technical support deadline is November 7th, 24 hours before the actual hard deadline. That technical support deadline is your final chance for us to resolve any issues. So if you report a problem to us by 8 p.m. on November 7th, we will guarantee resolution of that issue before the real deadline to make sure you submit. So we like to tell students, try to submit your application on the 7th, not the 8th, just to make sure you get it in and don't have any issues with that. So mark your calendar 24 hours ahead of time, and we can't wait to see what you do. Good luck. All right, thanks for joining. Bye-bye.